Imagine you and your partner both lost your jobs in middle age. This couple lived in Finland. One day, the husband, Lori, gently covered his wife's eyes and mysteriously led her to the living room. What she saw was a high-end color TV with a remote control. The man happily introduced the various functions of the TV to his wife. However, she looked worried because she knew it had been bought on credit. The shelves at home, including the sofa they were sitting on, were all bought in installment, and their loans were still unpaid. The uncertainty of the future made Helen deeply anxious, but Lori was unconcerned about her worries, believing that everything was under control. Lori worked as a tram driver with a not-so-high salary but an easy job. Helen, on the other hand, was a restaurant manager who not only served customers daily but also handled various kitchen matters. For instance, the bulky drunken chef caused trouble during work hours. When Helen brought security to handle the situation, the chef became aggressive, injuring the security guard's palm with a knife. It was only Helen's personal intervention that managed to subdue the chef. After work, Helen always waited by the roadside to ride home with her husband on the tram. Though they didn't speak much during the journey, the air was filled with a sense of happiness. Their days, though not wealthy, were filled with contentment. However, with the arrival of an economic crisis, their lives were about to face a severe test. One day, Lori went to work as usual, only to find the management using a deck of cards to decide on layoffs to cut costs. Unfortunately, Lori drew the lowest card, the 3 of clubs, meaning he would have to bid farewell to his job in a month. Faced with impending unemployment, Lori became restless, and Helen noticed his unusual behavior. Despite this, Lori remained tight-lipped. On that day, Helen took a day off specifically to accompany her husband to watch a movie. Unexpectedly, halfway through the movie, Lori stormed out in anger. He vented his frustration to the ticket seller, complaining about the movie's quality and demanding a refund. Actually, the ticket seller was his sister and had not even taken their money since the beginning. At the restaurant, Lori finally opened up about his job situation. Considering their current circumstances, Helen suggested applying for unemployment benefits, but Lori refused, feeling it would be an insult to his capabilities as a man under 50 to do so. He believed he must prove himself again. Helen, as a supportive wife, chose to encourage him silently. However, reality proved harsh. Lori not only struggled to find a new job, but also started drinking heavily every night. The burden of life seemed to fall entirely on Helen's shoulders, pushing her to throw herself even more into her work. Unfortunately, just as she was fully committed, the restaurant she worked for faced issues and was soon to be acquired by a chain, leading to the inevitable dismissal of all the old staff, including Helen. Despite feeling despondent, Helen continued to work diligently until the restaurant's last day of operation. After bidding farewell to her boss and colleagues, she packed up her work uniform with a heavy heart. Feeling resentful, she went straight to the new boss and said that she had worked her way up from a dishwasher to a manager. She expressed her willingness to do anything to stay, but the more humble she became, the more ruthless the new boss turned out to be. He even mocked her for being too old, despite Helen's defense that she was only 38. The new boss insisted that his team consisted of young people and that Helen was simply too old. With nothing more to say, Helen silently left the place where she had worked for many years. Undeterred, she began a frantic job search, applying to various nearby establishments, including dessert bars and pubs, but faced rejection at every turn. The harsh realities of life left Helen feeling lost about the future, yet she knew that life had to go on. The couple arrived at the Human Resources Center to register for job opportunities. However, in the midst of an economic downturn, finding a suitable job was proving to be incredibly challenging. Lori told Helen that he had something to do to and asked her to go home first. Helen thought he might be going to drown his sorrows in alcohol, but in reality, Lori went job hunting behind her back. Truly, fortune favors the determined. He returned home confidently, holding a bouquet of flowers in his left hand and a package of meat in his right. It turned out that Lori had found a job as a bus driver. Although the route was a bit far and the work more tiring, the pay was higher than before. As long as Lori passed the medical examination the next day, he could officially start working. Upon hearing this news, Helen's anxious heart finally relaxed a bit. Early the next morning, she helped her husband prepare his clothes and worried that he might go hungry, even prepared a special lunch for him out of love. The couple's hope for the future was reignited. However, fate played another cruel trick on them. Due to Lori's near-deafness in one ear, he not only failed the medical examination but also had his professional driver's license revoked. This heavy blow caused the man before her to collapse. Helen tenderly comforted her husband, holding him close. The next morning, Lori tore up the documents for claiming unemployment benefits. This was his fight against fate and a defense of his dignity. Even if it meant selling his beloved car, he would not bow down to fate. Helen also chose not to give up and continued to search for work tirelessly every day. To save money, she discreetly took a newspaper from the library because it contained a job listing. However, no one answered the phone when she called the employer. Desperate to secure the job, she waited outside the door from night until the next morning to be the first in line for the interview. When the door finally opened, the boss informed her that the supervisor position was no longer available. Only the dishwasher position remained. Helen accepted without complaint, willing to do any job. To her dismay, the person in front of her was not the boss but a middleman. In order to get information about the job, she had to pay 500 marka. With no other choice, Helen reluctantly withdrew all her savings from the bank. She drove her husband's car overnight to the restaurant, only to find out that apart from the boss, there were no other employees. This meant that Helen had to handle all the tasks herself. Despite realizing that this was not a good situation, she had to bear it for the sake of survival. The next day, Helen officially started working at the restaurant. In order to make the restaurant look less shabby, Helen had to moonlight as an actress. She pretended to call out dishes in the kitchen, then sneaked into the kitchen to quickly cook, not daring to pause for a moment. After preparing the dishes, she would push them out through a small window, then take off her apron to play the role of a waitress, serving the food to the customers. She worked so hard, all in the hope that the restaurant's business would improve, and she naively hoped that the boss would give her a raise. One day, a familiar face appeared at the restaurant, the former head chef who was highly skilled but had fallen into alcoholism. Now, he couldn't even hold a knife steadily and couldn't find a decent job. His unemployment benefits were running out. Helen wanted to advise him to quit drinking, but the chef turned and walked away. Alone and defeated, he could only forget his miserable life by getting drunk. The boss was completely hands-off, only showing up at night to take the money and ignoring everything else at the restaurant. When Helen tried to discuss how to improve the restaurant with him, she received nothing but harsh words. Despite the terrible job, Helen couldn't bring herself to quit. However, to her surprise, the boss had been evading taxes all along. When the tax authorities showed up one day, Helen found herself unemployed once again. She had worked hard for 2 months without receiving a single paycheck. Feeling outraged, Lori confronted the boss, only to be violently beaten. 3 men planned to throw him into the sea, but their conscience led them to leave him at the pier instead. Lori, not wanting his wife to see him in such a state, hid in the dormitory of his previous workplace. A week later, he returned home with flowers in hand, ready to apologize to his wife, but instead of her, he found bank representatives there. Due to prolonged non-payment, the bank took away the TV and sofa. The couple's hardships continued. One day, while Helen was repairing her husband's shoes, she met the former restaurant security guard. He pulled her aside and suggested opening a restaurant together in a good location. He believed Helen could run the restaurant successfully. If they had no money, they could seek a loan from the bank. The two agreed immediately and started planning. Helen calculated the startup capital for the new restaurant, while her husband silently supported her, serving her tea and even selling his beloved car to contribute to the loan fund. However, without any assets for collateral, the bank ultimately refused to lend them money. With no other options, the desperate couple decided to take a chance and went to the casino.
Miten kävi?
Hävisin. Kaikki.
Helen tightly held her husband's hand, without a hint of complaint, even though they truly had nothing left. With no money to pay rent, they were on the brink of homelessness. While Lori spent the time playing word games, Helen refused to give up. Since the food industry was not viable, she decided to switch to another field, believing there was always a job out there for her. She found a job at a hair salon and unexpectedly encountered her former boss. After losing the restaurant, the boss felt like life had lost its meaning. She had always wanted to invest in another restaurant. Impressed by Helen's abilities, the boss offered her a job managing and running the business, even promising that in a few years, Helen could buy the restaurant back. The dark days finally saw a ray of sunshine with the boss's investment. With the boss's backing, Helen quickly rented a storefront. Meanwhile, Lori and the security guard found the former chef among the homeless on the street, and forcibly sent him to a rehabilitation center. To cut costs, Helen used second-hand items for the restaurant's decoration and did much of the work herself. The chef had successfully overcome his alcohol addiction, and the cooking equipment was gradually acquired. Due to there being many factories nearby, they decided to open a restaurant that offered good value for money, catering primarily to workers with their work meals. As they looked at the restaurant's name displayed, tears welled up in Helen's eyes. With everything ready, the boss was very pleased with Helen's performance. The grand opening day quickly approached. The security guard went out to the streets early to promote, and advertisements were placed in newspapers. In Helen's heart, she felt both excited and nervous. Everyone eagerly waited at the restaurant's entrance. Even the boss came to show support. But as time passed by, not a single customer showed up. Seeing that lunchtime was about to pass with no customers, Helen, feeling dejected, hid in the kitchen. The head chef who comforted her, saying that today might not be the day, but tomorrow, with hard work, things would improve. After a few more minutes, the first customer finally arrived, ordering a fish dish and 2 bottles of wine. While Helen remained composed on the surface, her heart was filled with excitement. Soon, the second customer arrived, and as time passed, more and more customers filled the restaurant. It turned out that the issue was not with their restaurant, but that the nearby workers finished work at 12:30. In no time, the entire restaurant was packed with customers. Just then, the phone rang. It was the Workers' Wrestling Association. They wanted to book the entire restaurant for the evening. At the end of the movie, Helen walked slowly to the door, gazing up at the sky. In that moment, the drifting clouds finally cleared. Her husband joined her outside, and the couple embraced tightly, looking ahead to a brighter future together. With that, the movie ends. Life is never without challenges, and the path to happiness is often fraught with obstacles. The most precious thing is having someone by your side to persevere with you, just like Helen and Lori.